Think about the properties of a perfect cube. It has 6 equal square faces, 8 vertices, and 12 edges. You know this to be true, and you can verify it in your mind without ever needing to touch, measure, or build a physical cube. This is the premise of the traditional armchair philosopher. For centuries, thinkers have argued that the human mind can discover truths about mathematics, logic, and morality simply by sitting in a chair and thinking. To understand how they do this, we need to divide knowledge into 2 categories. The first is a posteriori justification. This is any belief that requires sensory observation to verify. If I tell you that bachelors in the United States are taxed at a different rate than married men, you cannot prove that by just thinking about the concept of a bachelor. You have to go out into the world and gather empirical data. The second category is a priori justification. This applies to propositions you can justify solely by understanding them. Take the statement, "All bachelors are unmarried males." The moment you grasp the definitions of the words, you have the evidence you need to know the statement is true. When philosophers say a priori knowledge is independent of experience, they are making a specific distinction. You obviously need empirical experience to learn a language and acquire the concept of a bachelor, but once you have that concept, sensory experience plays no evidential role in proving the statement true. Most epistemologists agree that a priori justification exists. The problem is that we have no consensus on what mechanical process in the brain actually produces it. We know the mind can generate non-empirical truth, but we do not know the exact machinery making it happen. To solve this, researchers have proposed 3 competing mechanical models of pure reason: evidence, simulation, and entitlement. Each offers a different explanation for how we can know something without ever leaving the armchair. The first and most traditional candidate is rational intuition, a model defended by philosophers like George Beeler and Lawrence Bonjour. Philosophical intuition operates distinctly from psychological gut feelings, or the rapid pattern recognition Daniel Kahneman calls System 1 thinking. Instead, it is an intellectual seeming, a non-inferential state where simply contemplating a proposition results in an immediate grasp of its necessity or possibility. Under this model, intuitions have a modal tie to the truth. This means that if you fully understand a concept and you are in ideal cognitive conditions, sober, attentive, and rational, your intuitive grasp of that concept will be reliably accurate. To test this faculty, philosophers use thought experiments known as Gettier cases, scenarios designed to show that having a justified true belief does not always mean you possess actual knowledge. A classic example is the stopped clock problem. Imagine a person looks at a wall clock that says 1 p.m. They form the belief that it is 1 p.m. They are justified in this belief because the clock has historically been reliable, and by coincidence, it actually is exactly 1 p.m. But the clock broke exactly 24 hours ago. It is only right by luck. When presented with this scenario, the observer's mental output registers immediately. The person in the scenario has a justified true belief, but they lack actual knowledge. For defenders of Model 1, that immediate intuitive judgment acts as actual, non-experiential evidence. The intellectual seeming itself justifies the philosophical claim that knowledge requires an anti-luck condition. The internal debate here centers on how this evidence actually feels to the thinker. Philosophers like Elijah Chudnoff argue these intuitions have a specific glow, similar to physical perception, while others, like Ernest Slessa, argue they are purely cognitive states. Regardless of the exact feeling, Model 1 relies on a specific mechanical premise. The human mind possesses a distinct, non-sensory faculty tuned to perceive logical truth. Timothy Williamson offers a more deflationary theory. He argues that the rigid boundary between a priori and a posteriori justification is an illusion. To demonstrate this, Williamson uses a metric conversion thought experiment. Imagine a subject who needs to judge whether 9 inches is longer than 19 centimeters, but they have never memorized the mathematical conversion rate. This chart shows how the subject solves the problem. Instead of doing the math, they rely on their past perceptual experience with rulers and measurements. In their mind, the subject generates visual images of the 2 lengths, simulates placing them side by side, and literally observes the result in their imagination. The 9-inch line extends past the 19-centimeter line. The subject used empirical perception skills they acquired in the physical world, but they ran those skills offline in their imagination to deduce a correct answer. Williamson argues that this simulation process accounts for what we call pure reason. There is no need to invoke a separate faculty of intuition if we can arrive at the same logical truths by manipulating acquired concepts in a mental sandbox. Under this simulation hypothesis, a priori justification is a repurposing of our standard sensory hardware. Thought experiments and logical deductions are physical world calculations executed internally. The third model strips away the requirement for evidence entirely. This is non-evidential justification, advocated by thinkers like Crispin Wright and Hartree-Field. This model argues that you can be rationally justified in believing certain propositions without having any evidence to support them at all. Wright frames this around cognitive project presuppositions. To engage in any scientific or logical inquiry, you must first accept certain baseline rules that cannot themselves be proven. Consider the laws of logic, or the assumption that the physical world exists. We have no evidence holding them up. You cannot use logic to prove logic without arguing in a circle, and you cannot use physical evidence to prove you aren't dreaming. Instead, the structure is supported by default entitlement. Because the project of understanding the world cannot proceed without assuming you are not a brain in a vat, you are entitled to accept that presupposition. These are strictly epistemic entitlements, tied directly to the pursuit of truth. You cannot claim an entitlement just because a belief brings you comfort. It has to be a structural requirement for inquiry itself. Critics like Gilbert Harman point out a mechanical flaw in this model, the boundary problem. If you remove the requirement for evidence, it becomes difficult to define exactly which beliefs count as default reasonable. If all beliefs are considered justified until proven false, a subject could claim default reasonableness for specific, unevidenced absurdities, like telepathic communication with aliens on the exoplanet Gliese 581d. Model 3 successfully halts the infinite regress of needing proof for every logical law, but without boundaries on what qualifies as a valid presupposition, it risks opening the door to epistemic anarchy. Regardless of which mechanical model you adopt, philosophers have largely reached consensus on one point: the infallible armchair is dead. Historically, a priori justification was treated as absolute certainty. Today, it is understood through the lens of defeasibility, the idea that a rational, internally justified belief can be destroyed by the arrival of new evidence. John Hawthorne illustrates this by looking at paradigm instances of pure reason, like a mathematician constructing a complex proof. This handwritten formula for Fermat's last theorem states x to the n plus y to the n equals z to the n has no solutions for n greater than 2. If medical evidence reveals the mathematician was hallucinating, this a priori justification is instantly undercut. We see this historically. Immanuel Kant Olymphuer a priori justified in claiming that every event has a cause. But modern physicists studying random events at the subatomic level have empirically defeated that assumption. Pure reason does not exist in a vacuum. It is constantly vulnerable to being overridden by observational data. The fact that logic can be defeated by observation provides the foundation for naturalized epistemology. Hilary Kornblith argues that epistemic concepts like knowledge might be natural kinds, similar to water. We didn't deduce that water is H2O by thinking about its definition. We had to empirically investigate its structure. We treat geometric concepts like a cube differently, defining them purely by logic. If knowledge is a natural kind, a phenomenon occurring in human brains, then rational intuition is the wrong tool. You have to discover its nature through cognitive science, not logical deduction. This empirical push gave rise to experimental philosophy, or XPhi. Instead of relying on a simul philosopher's intuition, XPhi researchers survey hundreds of laypeople on thought experiments to test if intuitive judgments are actually universal. This chart shows how people from different socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds respond to identical philosophical scenarios. The results regularly show statistical disagreements, suggesting that intuitive judgments are influenced by environment rather than being objective perceptions of logical truth. To defend the validity of pure reason, philosophers like Carrie Jenkins point to the no miracles argument. Jenkins argues that our basic concepts must be grounded, meaning they accurately represent the external world. We use these internal concepts to navigate reality and survive. If our foundational logic was detached from the physical laws of the universe, our survival using those concepts would be a statistical miracle. The task for modern epistemology is proving exactly how this happens. Generating a logical thought is just the beginning. The actual challenge is proving that the mechanical architecture of the human mind maps directly onto the fabric of the universe.